action, action. Lights, camera, action. Let's go. Lights, camera, action, action. Pop up a little, pop up a little.
I'm Mark Ramsey, and I'm so excited today to talk to Kayhan Jamshidi. Kayhan, or Kay as I like to call him, is the director of strategy for a company called Method. Now, you may not have heard of Method, but Method is a kind of a brand experience company that is calls itself an independent design and innovation company and works with clients you have heard of, clients like Nordstrom, Time Warner, AOL, TED. I know I'm leaving out a lot, Kayhan. But
that's all right.
I want you to be able to tell me more about what your company does. But my motivation for talking to Kay today is to get a sense from way outside of radio of where the rest of the world sees radio strategically as a brand and as a platform, how that's evolving over time. So thank you and welcome, Kayhan.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very pleased to be talking to you. And it's a great opportunity as well to talk about radio. I have to say that radio is strangely enough, has not come across my radar as often as I would expect it to. And I think the fact that you're asking me these questions is actually really interesting in itself.
When you talk about the radio experience, what do you mean?
Okay, so for me, the radio experience, you got to look at this from the user perspective, from your personal perspective. Just, what does it mean for me to actually listen to radio? It's this little voice in my ear that while I'm doing other things, I'm able to sort of just absorb things. And when something interesting appears, I can dial into it, I can absorb it, I can concentrate. And when I'm not so interested or when I need to do something else, I can dial out of that and I can dip into something else. Now, that's unique. You cannot do that on a TV screen. You cannot do that basically on any screen at all. A screen demands your attention. So, there's a cultural thing, there's a personal thing, there's something that's really special about radio, and that is the radio experience to me.
Okay, now how does that experience change when we integrate the digital kinds of innovations that you were talking about earlier? Let's leave aside for a moment whether or not people have pockets deep enough to do that. Let's talk about the wisdom of doing it, and if we were to do it, how we would best do it so as to enhance our ability to maximize our brand.
Okay, so the wisdom of it is something that's a really fascinating question, because the whole power of the radio experience is the fact that it's kind of low engagement for me, in the sense that I don't need to work very hard to enjoy radio. Mm-hmm. I flick it on and it's the ultimate curated channel experience. Mm-hmm. And there's a really deep, big, serious question. Okay, if you start fiddling with that format, if you start saying you're going to need to interact in order to get more value out of this, then suddenly it's not radio anymore. This suddenly is a website. It's enhanced TV. It's something else, but it's not radio anymore. And so then the question becomes, okay, is there a smart way of doing that? Can you keep the value of radio? Can you keep what's exciting about radio? But still add something, still take advantage of the opportunities. I think one of the really lovely things that you're seeing is that because of the low cost of producing the content, you can see much more sort of podcast style content starting to appear in sort of independent radio stations and things like that. So suddenly, where you had whatever it was, 20 channels on your dial in the UK from big commercial radio stations, you've got internet radio, and there's a much wider range of content, a much wider range of voices, much wider range of opinions that are all out there. So there's a simple step which hasn't really transformed radio exactly, but it's just added a lot of value for me as a user of radio. That's a lovely first step. Now, but where can that take you? Now, where it should take me, or one direction where it can take me, is that it can give me lower local community insights. Because it's easier and cheaper, and for people to create radio content from all around the world, I can get this little flavor of what's going on in any place in the world, straight from the people who are in those situations through radio. Which, if they tried to create video content of that, it would be much more difficult, much more expensive, much less live, possibly much less real, because it's just more produced. So, there is a content area there which feels natural to the radio stage, but what it doesn't feel natural to is the world of big business, the world of advertisers, the world of commerce. It's like, okay, so that could be kind of an interesting direction for radio, but what the heck does that mean to Coca-Cola trying to sort of punt its latest flavor of refreshing drink? I think that maybe is where what's possible bumps up against what is actually viable from a
Well,
commercial perspective.
let's talk about that for a second, because obviously everything's driven by the merger between possible and viable, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, how do you see that merge happening? And if that kind of expression of radio's brands by essentially, taking it into niches powered by more consumers in more places in more ways, if that isn't commercially viable, then what is?
Huh. So that is probably the biggest question. I think so. In the UK, we created the UK Radio Player project, and there was an idea. This was kind of driven by the BBC, and there was an idea that there would be a central single platform for all IP, radio players, commercial stations, etc. And by creating the concept and the vision was that by creating a single platform that everybody could buy into, then you could start creating advantages of scale. So big commercial players could sit in there and would drive maybe a scale of audience, but also smaller players could be sitting in a similar space and could maybe piggyback a little bit off that and bring in a little bit of innovation. But what's actually happened with that platform is that the interface itself just does not allow for anybody to really to innovate in the space. It collapses down all possibilities to you just select a radio channel from the interface, and you get that streamed, and that's about it. There's very little space to do anything interesting with that. So I think it's been a big disappointment for anybody is interested in the medium and is interested in the space. And certainly, again, speaking to some of the big commercial players from their perspective, I think it's been a huge disappointment. And I think trying to trying to create a platform that people can buy into. We've got a lot of bitty sort of, different applications around the place, different websites and so on, and it's all just very, very bitty. And from the user perspective, as soon as you stumble across this stuff, maybe you bond with it in one place or another, but you don't discover a world of opportunity. You discover a thing, and that's kind of it. So I think that I think it's going to be necessary to start building a much stronger ecosystem, to start either by creating some opportunities for different players to link up to each other, so you can hop around and through entering the world of radio through one portal, you can discover other areas, or having a sort of single platforms. So the equivalent, what's the virtual equivalent of the radio set? I buy my radio, and that's my access to the world of radio, and I don't need to go anywhere else. And I get little nice battery portable ones. I have it in my home. I sit it there, and so on. Now, if we're going to create a platform which takes advantage of digital, what does that new set look like? And if it's on my website, and if it's on my iPhone, and if it's on my tablet, and if it's in a box which sits where I sit, and if it's on my TV, and et cetera, what does that look like? We need to make it an awful lot easier for people to actually access this stuff in the first place. And there are still, unfortunately, there's some real, technical problems to overcome in this. So 3G is still pretty rubbish for giving you a good solid stream to your phone, and why would you even start to really get excited about that if as soon as you start, it starts buffering and 30 seconds later you drop off and so on, and then you have to go back in again, and meanwhile your battery is being absolutely pounded, and you can't make a phone call in 5 minutes time because you've lost all your juice. So there's some pretty fundamental kind of network platform hardware issues that people just are not properly addressing.
Okay, again, let me back up a little bit. You had said, among other things, that in the UK you've got a common player that has strengths and weaknesses associated with it. Here in the US, we have a small number of very large groups and an awful lot of smaller ones, and we have just a ton of broadcasters and a ton of stations. So the ability to herd those cats to any one common platform is almost impossible. That being the case, I want to go back to something else you said, which was, if you start building in all these applications and you do the video, you do the internet, at a certain point you're not radio anymore. And I want to ask you about that, because is that necessarily a problem? After all, what radio really has more than anything are these relationships with a large number of consumers and a large number of advertisers together, especially in local markets. So if we leverage those relationships across other platforms and across other media, isn't that by one definition radio?
So that's where I think it is, and kind of who cares what the name is, okay? So if you're going to
Right.
be sort of slightly purist and try and reflect it against the past or compare it to the past, then in my view, it's like you shouldn't call it radio anymore because it doesn't reproduce the experience which is radio, and I think there is some value in that. But on the other hand, and I think you're absolutely right. Who cares about the past? Push forward, create the future. Create new contents, create new relationships with customers, and do stuff that people are excited about. And if you want to keep calling it radio, great. If you want to call it something else, so what? It's the point is that it should be exciting for people, and if it is exciting for people, they're going to pick up on it, and they're going to enjoy it. I think. I guess coming back to that sort of real user-centric view of what this is, there is there is definitely a massive value in pushing a button and just getting something, and there is there's a whole world of personalization in there. There's a whole world of having a much closer connection to people's to people's behaviors, to tracking their getting some of the data exhaust, as people call it, coming off those people, and then being able to sort of build services around that, right?
Right.
And respond to that, and just losing the whole sort of history or the whole idea of a channel and a linear stream, which has its place and is useful at times. But actually, you can have more kind of adaptive streaming where you're more aware of people's location, presence, context, what they're doing, what they're up to, what they like, what they don't like, and you can start chopping and changing what you're offering to people, and also offering options for people to change that on the fly and kind of go, okay, well, I like this DJ, I like what they're talking about, but I want a sort of slightly different tone of music. I'm feeling like I want to go up now, and this is a bit down, and things like that. There's where the technology isn't quite there yet, but in principle it is. And by Moore's law and so on, it'll be there way faster than anybody thinks.